2, 3, 4.
Welcome to Don't Do That, the podcast where we talk about what not to do at work and beyond.
As equity practitioners, we found ourselves often thinking that folks should stop doing things before they start doing things. Hence the title of our podcast, Don't Do That. I'm Ani. I'm an equity coach, organizational equity strategist, and educator with a deep curiosity for how to improve systems and a commitment to lift others as I continue to learn and grow.
I'm Karen, and I've worked in social justice for over a decade. I'm a consultant, coach, and thought partner. My purpose is to make community matter. I do that by helping leaders create better work environments. Adi and I met as consultants and quickly became friends. Collectively, we have over 25 years of experience navigating equity, inclusion, and justice in the workplace. Don't Do That is a platform to tell stories about making mistakes at work and how to fix them. The views on this podcast are our own. We do not speak on behalf of our organizations or the communities we mention.
Okay, welcome listeners. Today on Don't Do That, we are discussing Cultural Heritage Months. We are talking about Black History Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, Pride, Women's History Month, all of those things. Should we still be celebrating these at work? Of course, the answer is not simple. On one hand, these months offer a dedicated time to celebrate our history and culture, especially those histories and cultures that are often erased or hidden. On the other hand, sometimes these celebrations can go left. It can feel performative at best, right? It can be harmful at worst, or feel like a checkbox. So what separates the don't do that from let's do more of that? Let's get into it.
Yes, let's do it.
So, of course, we're going to start with setting the table. What's the landscape? So first, I want to talk about like the history of Heritage Months. Heritage Months in the U.S. really, I think the first one, as far as I could tell via my research, appears to be African American History Month. Of course, shout out to Carter G. Woodson, created African American History Week in the early 1900s, 1926, and then it later became adopted as a month. I think as far as most of the holiday and heritage months, it feels like towards the like 80s, 90s is when we started to see more holiday and heritage months recognized nationally, and really we had a more of a culture around those celebrations and communities in the mid 90s or so. Given that context, we really didn't see holiday heritage months showing up in the workplace really till like the late 90s, early 2000s. And I think that's helpful context because we haven't been doing this very long. So it makes sense if folks are not getting it right. Because not only have we not been celebrating holiday and heritage months that long, but we also haven't been celebrating them at work that long. So good context there. Of course, the goal of these months and days are really to think about offering opportunities for both education and cultural appreciation, right?
Yes.
To both say, how can we learn more about these communities and how can we celebrate and just appreciate the value and their contribution to our national culture? I want to give a couple of examples, and I think Target, not to pick on Target, it's just a good example. Just a
Very
good
good
example.
example.
And I think a good example of the ways that you can think about those celebrations, right? So when you think about how an organization, a company can acknowledge a heritage month, they can acknowledge it like for their company, for the internal culture, employees who work there, and or externally with community, external stakeholders, customers, clients, etc. So a couple things I want to note with Target in 2023, Target, prior to 2023, Target was always sort of like well known with folks in like the business world for being sort of like a progressive employer. They had a ton of community partnerships. They would always highlight local businesses and stores. They had really inclusive benefits, probably on the forefront of being like a more inclusive company to work for. And I know they had like ERGs and were celebrating, Black history among their employees, right? Internally. In
Okay.
2023, Target had this thing that came up in the news around Pride Month. They were offering Pride merchandise for customers,
Yeah.
including things like bathing suits for trans folks, and it led to some backlash and boycotts and then decline in their sales. And this
Mm-hmm.
was for the first time in 6 years that Target had experienced a decline in their sales.
Okay.
Noted. So then in 2024, next year they decided to only sell Pride collection in stores based on like historical sales performance, right? So they were looking at the sales from years before and said, okay, we're only going to sell it in stores that, those sales, went well. But they, of course, had communication that went out publicly saying, okay, we're still going to be committed to supporting the LGBTQ plus community year round, and we support LGBTQ plus organizations, etc. And then 2025, there's controversy again. The company makes this public statement about scaling back DEI initiatives, including
Mm-hmm.
their internal goals around hiring and promoting more women and folks from historically underrepresented racial groups, and including pulling back on some of their diverse suppliers and pulling back some of the minority owned businesses that they had been promoting. And this did not begin in 2023, right? They had been doing these things for years. So they sort of, based on, I will say, the, the, the landscape of the national culture,
Right.
the tone and tenor of our
The
national
noise.
culture, it feels like Target was sort of like pivoting on what they were doing both internally and externally. So, given that context of like sort of the history and this example of Target and what it can look like internally and externally,
Yeah.
let's dive into the discussion.
Let's do it. It's a lot
So,
of chatter we can have on
a
this.
lot of chatter we can have about this. So, I'm going to just start with first question here. Why do you think people are still even bothering with this? Celebrating Heritage Months, what are the pros when done well? And then how do you sort of think about sort of the drawbacks?
Yeah. So this question around why I think is a really good one because I don't think that enough organizations and companies actually ask themselves, why are we highlighting this particular culture or group or experience? And to me, without a firm and clear answer to that question, I think it can lead to a lot of different, like that back and forth in the example that you gave with Target of like, we're doing something one year, we're not doing something another year, we're coming back and doing something the year after that. And for me, I think that especially for folks that have that cultural background, the impact is negative. Like that back and forth is impacts you negatively because it's hard to then understand like, well, where do you really stand when it comes to this practice. And so for me, in asking the question of why do people and do companies celebrate these moments, I think that I realize that it's really about and is a meaningful part of people's lived experiences. And oftentimes these are cultural practices or history that we can't like pick up and put down as we want to, right? This is something that we are living 365 days out of the year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And so I think that for me, it means that any organization or company shouldn't treat it so trivially, like, and then to add like the commercial element on top of it, where to your point in the history that you gave, we haven't been celebrating these things for a long time. We haven't been practicing how to do it well. And so to me, not having the practice of doing something well and then wanting to commodify it, girl,
Yeah,
it's just prime for all
recipe
kinds
for
of don't do that.
disaster.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yes, yes. And the other thing, as you were talking, the other thing I was thinking about, which is sort of a newer or newish phenomenon, is there are these like mega companies where everyone is their customer. So as someone who was like a business student, like I always learn, like you start with who is your client, who are you serving, who's the customer. And if I think about like a company like a Patagonia, right? Like they are all about sustainability and all of those things. So if they're celebrating Earth Week, it tracks, right? Like this
Yeah.
is the ethos of their company. It makes sense. They're not just doing it for the week. They're doing it throughout the year. Maybe during the week, they're sort of like lifting up like a couple of new things, but this is like a lifestyle. They are quite true to this and not new to this. But
Yeah.
a company like Target, I can't say like, oh, their customer is like urban centers, or their customer is this particular age demographic, or their customer is. So I think they probably struggle with like when we are crafting our values or the why, like who are we? If it's everybody, it's like you're gonna make a misstep because we are all not the same, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Well,
hard to like create the value proposition unless it is tied to like profit, right? Like if you're saying like, okay, our goal is to make a profit, then it makes sense then to say, okay, if we're not making a profit, then this is going to be our sort of metric to say we need to pivot.
I understand that premise, but having worked in the private sector, one of the things that I know for certain is that there is a lot of data and insights that companies have. And even in terms of like where Target is located, there has to be a certain criteria, right, that they are looking
For
at as it
sure.
relates to data and insights as to why you would put a Target location there. There
Yep.
is a prime customer profile for a Target versus a customer of, let's say, a Walmart or a CVS.
Yep.
And so I think that it's important when we think about like these cultural practices and celebrations, it's like how are you coupling and using that data to inform your why as well. And I think that could lead to better decisions around what to do and what not to do.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And are they in fact using that data to then cultivate the these we're going to pick these particular celebrations because it makes sense for this sort of like profile that we've created around like who our customer is. So
Right.
I
Yeah.
think yeah, I think it's hard for companies to resist the sort of like let's figure out what is riding the wave of like the popular culture.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to hear from you, like when you think about companies doing this work well, both like internally with their employees and like externally, what are some of those examples that you can think of?
Yeah. So first I'll say that for me, even in my own like work experience, in the moments where I feel like these cultural celebrations or heritage months have been done well, I leave feeling like, you know, I was affirmed if I'm a part of that community or culture, or I feel like I was educated if I'm not a part of that community or culture. And I feel a deeper bond or connection that I didn't have before, engaging in like whatever practice or celebration or highlight was done. And so for me, it's like, I think people also need to think more intentionally about what is the takeaway, right, for us doing this and like what's the message behind it. Because I do think that these are moments to highlight the stories and practices and experiences that are left in the shadows of dominant culture, even though they can be a central part of like individuals' lived experiences. Um, so for me, in terms of like two examples where I feel like this is done well, and I'll give like an internal example and then a more outward facing. One is I got to participate in during the Lunar New Year, which is, you know, the New Year celebration for East and Southeast Asian cultures. The organization I was in, they put on like a trivia about Lunar New Year, and it was something that you could join virtually. And it was so informative to me and so engaging because I'd heard of Lunar New Year before, but I didn't know much about it. And so for me, it was really helpful and an engaging way to like learn more about what it meant and the importance of it for East and Southeast Asian cultures. And I felt like it wasn't something that again was like mimicking culture or trying to imitate culture, but really the primary purpose was like education. And so I thought
Mhm.
that that was done really well.
Yeah.
For another example, just in terms of like an external facing, actually came that I've seen for was from Ben and Jerry's, where they created an ice cream flavor called Sunny Honey Home to highlight and celebrate folks with refugee backgrounds. And they
Mhm.
actually co-created the flavor with folks that have a refugee background from Morocco, Afghanistan, and one more place that I'm forgetting. And to hear the story of like the flavor and the process of co-creating a flavor that is reminiscent of what home means for folks that are from different parts of the world, but also have a background, a refugee background,
Yeah.
and to know that like the company used the business that it's in, right? An ice cream business, and creating a flavor to celebrate and highlight that. I just thought that that was done really well,
Yeah.
in a way that, yes, it's something that commercialized it, but I think the process of getting there and being able to share the story and intention behind it was done well. So those are two, that's kind of two examples in my experience that I would lift up.
Yeah. That's awesome. What about ones that maybe missed the mark a little bit? You don't have to explain the activity, but maybe some of the things that felt like it missed the mark.
Yeah, so for me, I think that this, when I was thinking about like why are there experiences where these things feel empty or they just don't like land well?
Yeah.
And for me, I do think that a part of it is around like mimicking culture or trying to like mock or imitate these cultural experiences. Where for me, I think that when you are trying to honor these different cultural moments, there's like a level of humility that you have to approach,
Yeah.
this with a level of like curiosity and care that I don't think we always get to see. So I would say I'm thinking back to 2020, right? When after the murder of George Floyd and Juneteenth was on the map, honey. Like that is where all of a sudden,
Yes.
folks became aware that Juneteenth was a holiday that was important to us as Black folks and African American folks. And for the organization that I was in, we were planning. This was actually not 2020. This was a few years after, like 3 or so years after 2020. But we
Hmm.
were planning. A team of mine was planning a Juneteenth celebration, and my staff member came to me to like talk about. We were having a meeting to update on like where they were in the planning process.
Hmm.
And girl, one of the ideas that they had was to bring a shaman
Oh no.
and to right to bring a shaman to the celebration to like conjure up the ancestors. And I
Oh
said,
no.
I said
The
no,
Juneteenth
we,
ancestors?
girl, we are not conjuring any ancestors in mixed company like this.
Oh,
So
no.
it was like, mm-mm. And I think that, again, well intentioned, right, to want to celebrate this moment. But we just have to be careful about how we
Yeah.
are engaging. And sometimes you need people, especially people that are close to that culture or have that experience, to say, yeah, don't do that. Like,
And I'm
we're not
gonna
going to do
note
that.
I'm gonna note that sometimes people who are of that culture also get the don't do that. Because I'm thinking of there was at a organization that I worked for, there was a Black History Month celebration.
Okay.
And I remember being there and someone who is identifies as being Black was leading and of course the attendees were not all Black. I think this was for Black History. But the person leading it ended up doing a Kwanzaa call and response. And then was asking people to like pour libations for their ancestors and then call out their ancestors' name. And I remember a woman who was there was like Aunt Judy and like pouring water on the floor. It was a mess. It was a mess. But people perceive this to be like, oh, this is like an authentic sort of celebration of like blackness because it's being led by this person. Just like
Hmm.
horrified, like, oh no, these people are gonna leave and be like, oh, black people just pour water on the floor and speak Swahili. I was like, this is not appropriate
Yes.
at all. So,
Yeah.
also, like, there has to be some due diligence for everyone participating. You can't just say, oh, this person identifies as insert whatever, and like,
Yeah.
yeah, they can lead. They'll totally handle this.
Yeah.
I think it sort of minimizes, like, okay, this is to understand history and all of that stuff. Like,
Yeah.
people spend years trying to unpack and understand those things. So it's not just like, oh, if you identify as that, like you're the go-to for that. So
Yeah. I would also say to that point, I think we also have to insert a question not only to like the why we're doing this and what we're gonna do, but is this appropriate for work?
yeah,
Right? Like
we
I
should
think
always
that
ask ourselves that question, Karen. We should, as a standard, we should always say, is this appropriate for work? Yes.
yes, because I think that sometimes people want to get all of their things from work. And it's like, this is not appropriate for work. Like, that is something that I think is beautiful, and you should do that outside of this workplace. But we're not going to do this here. And, like, for the example that I gave, I'm sure that the experience with the shaman and
Yeah.
connecting with the ancestors is a beautiful one. We are not doing it at work,
Always. No.
in mixed company, especially. We're
No.
not doing it.
And
We're
leave
not
the
doing
ancestors be. Don't bring them into the corporate environment. They don't want to, you don't even want to be here. Why are you bringing them here? Like, that's crazy
it.
work. That
Yes.
is crazy work. Yes. Okay. So I think our takeaways from that are, for sure, it has to be connected to the why.
Yes.
You should definitely make sure that it is something meaningful and work appropriate,
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to move us into our do that or don't do that segment, my
Okay.
favorite segment. I'm going to start with the first one. You brought it up. Um, Juneteenth is a good example. Should people celebrate the holiday or just take the day off? Are we having like a little cookout? Are we doing a little social events? Or
Mhm.
are we just taking the day off and that is the celebration?
So I think it's okay to do both.
Okay.
Again, but I think again, whatever we are doing to celebrate, we need to check the box on those questions. Like, why are we doing it? Because here's the thing with Juneteenth in particular, and back to the point around 2020, it got on the map, right? And then now in 2025, I'm sure if we were to take a survey, I don't know how many companies or organizations are still celebrating Juneteenth because, again, like you mentioned, of the way that the climate has changed, quote unquote, where it's like, well, why did we do it in the first place? And
Climate was different. That's why. The climate indicated you could do this.
but Juneteenth has been around. It was around before then, and it's still going to be around. So again, I
Yeah.
think that we have to ask those questions. But in terms of, I think it's okay to celebrate it, but it should be work appropriate, and you should give people the day off. Like if you
Yeah.
really want to commemorate, give folks the day off for Juneteenth.
Yes, it is a day of rest, a day
Mm-hmm.
to acknowledge we no longer had to work. So for sure, I think the day off. And also, I think another thing is like know your employees. Like if no one's asking for it, don't feel compelled to do it. If no one has says this is what we desire, like you can save that money for something else.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes folks feel like they have to do more or whatever. I think you also have to like know your employees. So
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. My do that or don't do that is dressing up to commemorate these cultural holidays and or moments for any Black History Month, for Women's History Month, for Pride. Do we dress up to commemorate these things?
Do we dress up? So I want to start with, is this work appropriate? I want to start with that question. It's such an important question, Karen. We
Mm-hmm.
have to start with, is this work appropriate?
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is, I do think we can get into dangerous territory with like the costumes and other people's perception of
Hmm.
those things. While it may feel celebratory to you, it might read as cultural appropriation to others.
Very much.
I generally am going to say don't do that.
Hmm.
If you would not wear this outfit on a regular day to work, um, you should not do that on this particular celebration. And there are people who wear culturally inspired clothing to work on a regular basis, right? And those outfits are wonderful and for sure. So yeah, I'm erring on the side of don't do that. It's very hard to get that right and very easy to get that wrong.
Very easy. I am remembering the kente cloths that our Congress people wore.
Man, man, man.
How many years ago was that? No.
Man, and then they had the little stoles, and they were
Yeah,
all leaning in the
correct,
Capitol, in the
correct,
rotunda, knees
correct.
down and the fists up. It doesn't read well. It does
It,
not read well at all.
no,
It didn't read well at the time,
it didn't.
and
I
it's worse
agree.
looking back. Like if you're not a kente stole person, you don't have to be that to be in
Hmm.
solidarity, right? Like
You don't.
you can just in your actions just be there, make
Yeah,
good choices, and that's enough. We don't need the
yeah,
kente.
yeah.
Um,
I agree. I would say don't do that. Let's not dress up.
okay. Do that, don't do that. Have employees participate in a panel to discuss their lived experience of that identity and culture. So let's say it's Hispanic Heritage Month. We're going to have three employees, talk about their experience as insert whatever their ethnic identity is to share with
Mhm.
other employees about their experience.
That's a good question. I will say do that with an asterisk of how is this connected to the business that we're in or the work that we do or the communities that we serve, because having people talk about their lived experience just for the sake of hearing about it, especially at work, I think can go into, again, that inappropriate territory, especially if it's not well facilitated.
Yes.
Which we also need to say facilitation is an art and a skill
Yes.
that people need to have. So we can't just have, so and so wanting to do it because they're passionate about it. That's great, but we need some skill there too. So I would say that if the conversation is also connected to this lived experience and how that shows up in the work that we do, the business that we're in, and the business that we're in that happens year round, right? Like, not something that we talk about only at this particular time once and never mention it again. So I think a panel can be helpful. I think it can affirm, it can educate, it can build bonds, but we have to be intentional about how we're designing that panel.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's a do that, but the asterisk is like very carefully. Like one, we never want to make employees feel like a mascot or a token or like you're here to educate others. Two, I feel like people should be compensated in some way for their time if it's not directly connected to their job. If they're not L&D, if they're not the person who's mentoring or leading, like don't pull me away from what I've been hired to do to like educate the broader culture. And like three, for sure, the content of that discussion should be limited to narrowly like how is this connected to our business and our work. I don't want to be on a panel discussion and we're talking about hair and we don't work for a beauty company. Like no,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing that. It has nothing to do with the business that we are in. Like I can absolutely talk about like what it means to be a black woman in corporate spaces and how I've navigated mentorship. Yeah. Do I want to talk about the food that I eat? No. I'm not a chef. I barely cook, you know. I certainly am not cooking Ethiopian food. Like I order out like y'all. Like you tell me. I don't know. So I think it can be done and be really powerful.
Yeah.
But also I've seen it go left.
Yes. Me too. Okay, so my do that or don't do that is to make products or offer services that commercialize a particular cultural practice or cultural moment, history. Do we do that? Yes or no?
Give me an example.
I think you talked about Target earlier, making,
Oh yes, yes. Like
celebrating,
t-shirts.
and making things related to Pride. I've seen Walmart make ice cream in relation to Juneteenth.
Oh wow.
Um, you know,
What
I
flavor
think we
was
have.
it?
Girl,
Was it horrible? Was it like watermelon?
don't give me the line. I don't know.
Oh, that's horrible. Okay. Yes. I think I'm going to say do that with an asterisk as well, because I will say there are some times if I'm having a celebration of something, I wish I could go to Target and just get the party pack for that, right? I wish there was like oh, we're having a Juneteenth barbecue and I could just go get the little red, black, and green. It's like all set up. I can put it on the table and it's easy breezy. I don't have to be making things or pay $1,000 on Etsy to have something handcrafted. Like that could be great. Same thing for like a Kwanzaa, or there are certain things. Ethiopian New Year. I wish there was a place I could go to and just purchase merchandise and just have it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And people have to be a little bit more thoughtful about how they're doing it, to like bring in authentic voices who can guide that process, to say this is an exchange of like we're going to provide quality, what insert whatever the thing is, because we respect and value your community, not like we're trying to ride a cultural wave and like actually don't care at all about your community. You could tell when people is like, I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, I think it's beautiful to have like trans inclusive swimsuits. That feels like a need. I'm sure the community is like, great, I can go to Target and buy what I need. I don't have to like make it or handcraft, like that feels like a great opportunity. I think the miss is like, you got to stand on business. If you said this is a value, like you can't then pull back from it.
Yeah. I think for me, where it goes awry is when I, as a consumer, I can tell that it is just for me to give an exchange, a transactional exchange of
Yeah.
said product, my money, right?
Yes.
And like, there's not, I mean, which is the business, but I think that's where it tends to go wrong, more wrong than right.
Yeah.
And for me, like, I think when I think about even the process that it takes for something to go from concept to market, that for most businesses, that is a long time frame, right? That's a long
Yeah.
runway.
Yeah.
And so there is a lot of opportunity, to your point, to be intentional about how and why something goes to market. And like, I would rather that be connected to, again, the business or work that you're in. So, how are you working with small businesses or
Yeah.
women owned businesses or Black owned businesses or LGBTQ plus, owned businesses to use the platform of your retail to market their products and not only make it available like at one moment in time and then I
Yeah.
never get to see it again for, the rest of the year. It's like, how is this a consistent and continual process so that I know, to your point, you are actually standing on business and you're not just trying to boost your sales for this moment in time.
Yes. Um, okay. Let's move to our final thoughts and key takeaways.
Okay.
So, as you are thinking about your final thoughts, I want to sort of like summarize some of the things that we talked about. So, as a key takeaway, for sure, cultural heritage months and holidays aren't inherently wrong. I think we started there. It can be these beautiful moments of celebration, create access for folks, and really educate others. It's all in its execution. We had a bunch of asterisks there. Um, I think these months should be mirrors and windows. So, mirrors for staff and employees to feel seen, and windows into the values of your organization, making sure to answer that question of why. So, make sure you are not just celebrating for that 1 month or day. Bring it into your values, your policies, your practices. Make sure you know your employees. They should be leading these conversations, and then make sure you are appropriately resourcing them. And then it should be reflective of the workforce that you want, and you have the power to do so.
Yeah. I think that's a great summary. Mine are very similar. For me, I think being clear about the why, like we talked about, is super important. And I think that has to be connected to your point, to your values as an organization or a company, and to the business or work that you're in, so that it limits or at least minimizes the transactional nature of highlighting these moments. I would say that my other takeaway is like, don't mimic or try to imitate or mock these cultural moments or practices, but really approach it with humility, care, and curiosity. And the last thing I would say is like, if it makes you pause initially, then
Don't do
pay
that.
attention, right? Pay attention to that. It could be, or go back to the drawing board, because you could be stepping into don't do that territory. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Awesome.
that's my thoughts. But thank you, Ani, so much for this conversation. I think that it is prime for a lot of our experiences at work. And especially, again, to your point, we haven't been doing this for a long time. So there's a lot of room for growth. But we would love to hear from you as a listener. We would love for you to leave a review of our podcast if you haven't yet, to let us know how you are engaging with our content. Let us know your experience with cultural, heritage celebrations and moments. So leave us a review. It will help boost our engagement. Share this podcast with your friends or colleagues. And if you'd like to reach Ani and I directly, feel free to email us at the don't do that pod at gmail.com. And until next time, remember,
Don't
don't do
do
that.
that.